In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the parking brake shoes on this Lexus IS. Located behind the rotor, so we'll have to take the brakes apart to get to these. Let's get started. With the vehicle safely raised and supported, use a 21mm socket, remove all 5 lug nuts, and then pull the wheel off. As a note, if one of your lug nuts is the locking lug nut type with the little socket that fits right on it, do not use an impact tool on it. Break it free by hand before you lift the vehicle up, or it could snap the little splines on the tool. I don't have that on this wheel, so I'm just going to take all of them off with my socket and impact gun. If your wheel is stuck on, put a lug nut on it so that it doesn't fall off, and then from the back side, take a rubber mallet and tap the tire, not the wheel, and that should break it free. Remove the wheel. Let's start by removing all these springs that hold on the pads and lock in the 2 pins. So you can use some needle nose pliers or a little pry bar screwdriver to pop this out of the center of the pad, just like that. This will unlock this spring. Then you have to pull it out of the top pin, hold on to it, because otherwise it'll go flying, and pull it out of the bottom pin. Next we have this, which you have to pull out of the pads, but you can't remove it until you remove the lower pin, because as you can see, it loops around it. So let's get this pin out. You can do it a couple different ways. If yours isn't seized in here, you should be able to grab it and gently pull it out. A lot of times though, rust and brake dust buildup will cause these to be stuck, in which case you can tap it from the backside with a punch and a hammer. However, it looks like mine is coming out pretty easily. Just give it twists back and forth, and there it is. Now you can remove this. And now nothing's holding on this upper pin, so let's remove this one as well. This one is a little bit more stuck, so I'm going to take a hammer and gently tap it. Now I'll use some larger pliers so I can get a better grip. Twist and pull. And there it is. There's nothing holding on the pads anymore, so they should just slide straight out. But what happens most of the time is the caliper still applies a little bit of pressure on the pads, and also they're going to be stuck top and bottom. So what I like to do is stick a screwdriver in here and compress the piston a little bit so that I can at least remove the pads without struggling. I'm going to use this little pry bar and just pry this in a little bit, and this should give me just the amount of space I need to free up the pads. There we go. You're gonna have to go back and forth on these. There's one. This one's quite stuck in here. That's most likely due to rust. And there it is. At the top, you'll see a 19mm headed bolt. This is actually the slider pin. Goes all the way through and bolts the caliper onto its bracket. Let's break this free. Now there is only one at the top because the bottom, you'll see in a second, just slides right out. There's no bolt head. Unthread this all the way and remove it. Set this aside. The caliper should at this point freely pivot back. Mine is somewhat stuck, most likely because the lower slider pin is seized. So I'm going to have to persuade it a little bit with a pry bar and then most likely tap it off with a hammer. Hopefully that's not the case for you, and you can just tilt it back and slide it right off. Now I need some more space over here to tap this out, so what I will do is remove the rotor next. That'll give me the space I need to get the caliper off the rest of the way, and then we can continue. Once again, hopefully you can just slide this right out. The rotor may or may not slide right off at this point. Mine is seized onto the hub, so what I'm going to do is use a hammer, tap right between the lug studs, and that should break it free from the hub. We may have to de-adjust the parking brake shoes a little bit, and that means bringing them in right through this opening, but we'll see about that once it actually breaks free from the hub. Careful not to hit the studs. And that broke free, so I'm going to try and remove it. And as I suspected, it is stuck right over here. So what I will do is spin this to right about here. where the plug faces the back of the vehicle. I'm going to remove this plug. And now with a screwdriver, I can access the adjuster right through here. It'll be somewhat difficult to see, but I'll show you once the rotor is off. There's a little star wheel adjuster that you can spin one way or the other, and that'll either bring the shoes closer together or expand them. Obviously, you want to bring them closer together. If you look with a flashlight, you can typically see it. And you don't really know which direction to go at first, so try it out. And if it gets worse, well, go the other way. If it's better, then keep going. I'm pretty sure I got it right the first time. Let's try now. Perfect. Take that rotor off, and right there is that little adjuster that I was talking about. And all I did was I went through this opening and spun it. For me, from the front, I had to push towards the back of the vehicle, and that brought the shoes closer together. Okay, after a little bit of hammering, I was able to get this to break free, push it off of this slider, and there's your caliper. Secure this with a bungee cord so it doesn't pull on the brake hose. Now let's take the parking brake shoes apart, and we'll start by removing this spring that is right by the adjuster. It is easiest to do this with some pliers, so just grab it. This is a pretty weak spring. Pull it out of that slot and then remove it from the bottom. Inspect any hardware that you remove, because if it's in poor condition, you're going to need to replace it, but sometimes you can reuse these. Now let's spread the shoes apart so we can get the adjuster out of here. Watch out, because this piece will just fall out, whereas the rest of it is threaded. Now let's remove these retaining springs that hold the shoes on. I found it easiest if you use some needle nose pliers and stick them right through the opening of the hub. Then you push back. Now you'll have to hold the pin from the back side, which actually is pretty much only doable with a punch. There will be a hole that goes right underneath the control arms into the knuckle. Basically impossible to see the other end of this pin because it's so buried in there. But once you find it, hold it so that you can push this backwards. That way you can release this cap. What you have to do is push it in and then twist 90 degrees, which is always easier said than done with these. There we go. That'll get the cap off right through that little slot. You don't have to remove that pin unless it's in poor condition and you're replacing it. Mine's okay, so I'm going to keep it in there. At this point, we'll do the same exact thing to the lower shoe, same procedure. Now we have to pry the shoes apart and get them out of the lever at the front, while also trying to unhook this spring. If you can't unhook it now, that's okay. We'll just do it after, but at least have to get them unhooked from this lever. Just as a note here, this lever might pop out as the pads come off. Sometimes it happens. That's okay if it does. Okay, so there's one. And the other. Now you can unhook the spring, take that out, take this out. There's your spring, and there are your shoes. I'm going to remove this just so I can make sure that everything is functioning as it should. This needs to pivot freely. Just unhook it from the parking brake cable, and I want to inspect this pivot point and lubricate it a little bit. You don't need a lot of lubrication here. Actually, too much is not good because it'll get gunked up, but you do want it to freely pivot. I rinsed this off with brake parts cleaner, and I put a tiny, tiny bit of silicone paste in there, just a drop, and worked it into the little pin that it pivots on. Like I said, you don't want a lot, you just want it to slide smoothly. Now I'm going to reconnect it to the parking brake cable right here. These two hooks will have to go on the back, and this spring-looking hook goes on the front just to cover it and protect it from the hub. Slide it through like this, and then hook it in, fold it over onto itself, make sure it's going the correct way with the pivot point at the bottom. Now I'm going to take a wire brush and just clean the areas where the shoes touch That way we get all the brake dust and rust and corrosion off of here, and we can apply a little bit of silicone paste that is rated for brakes or high temperatures. If you don't have that, you can use brake grease, and that'll prevent any squeaking or grinding noises as you apply and disengage the parking brake shoes, and it'll also prevent rust from building up. You don't have to get this very clean, you just want to remove all the debris. With that done, rinse the entire backing shield with some brake parts cleaner. Have a collection bucket underneath to catch the fluid. Take a little bit of brake grease or silicone paste that is rated for brakes and apply it to all the areas that you clean. All you need is a thin layer to coat it so it prevents corrosion from building up. Let's get the shoes in. I'm going to hook the spring on the upper shoe, put that in position, and then try to hook the spring on the lower shoe. Make sure that this double staged area is where the lever is, and then the other side right here is going to be on the adjuster side. There we go. Got the shoes hooked in. Just like that. And there we go. These are seated. Now let's get the shoes re-secured with the pins. This one here is going to be quite tricky to hold from the back side as you insert that spring, but to start you at least have to get it through the shoe. And at this point just do your best to hold this from the back side as you install the cap with the spring. The installation of the cap and spring for the upper part is actually going to be the most difficult part of this job, and that's because it's pretty difficult to hold that pin in place. Going to slide my setup in here, just like that. From the back side, I'll try to find the pin, and without looking, it won't be easy. I have a punch back there, and it looks like I got it. All right, I got it. This adjuster has to be cleaned up and lubricated, so I'm removing the threaded part of it. I'm going to clean the ends of these threads with a wire brush just quickly to get off all the corrosion that's on there. This is not seized and not rusted at all. Sometimes that happens, and if that were the case, I'd want to clean the inside of this too. This is still pretty well greased up, so I'm just going to put it right back in. I'm just going to cover this with some grease and thread it in, and that should keep it lubricated for a long time. I added some silicone paste that is rated for brakes on here, and I'm threading it back in. This will work the grease into the threads. I'm going to bottom it out completely. In order to retain the direction of the adjustability that was there before, I'm going to install it the same way it came out, with the free-floating piece on the bottom and the threaded part on the top. To do this, simply spread the shoes apart. There's no spring here yet, so this should be fairly easy. And just slide this in with the shoes going inside of the cutouts. Compress the shoes, and let's hook on the spring. This is the weaker of the springs, so there shouldn't be any difficulty with hooking this on. There we go. I'll grab it with some pliers. And there's only one opening here that this can go in, so just snap it in. I'm not going to mess with the adjustment because I have to put the rotor on to do that, so I'm going to leave this as is for now. We'll just use the screwdriver method through the hole in the rotor and adjust that when the time comes. Let's clean up the surface of the hub. This one's not in too bad of shape, so a wire brush should do the trick, but I just want to get rid of the rust, surface rust that is, and some of the corrosion on here. I just want to make sure the rotor will mount flat so that we don't get any pulsations or uneven brake wear. With that cleaned up, rinse it with some brake parts cleaner. We'll let that dry, and we'll coat this in a light layer of anti-seize so that it doesn't corrode in the future. Be sure not to get it on the parking brake shoes as you do this, so just block the area behind it. There we go. I have a new rotor, so I'm not worried about it, but if you are reusing your old rotor, you want to make sure this mounting surface here, the hat of the rotor, is clean and free of rust buildup and debris so that it can mount flat up against the hub. Now take the rotor and slide it over the hub, press it on all the way. Now I know my parking brake shoes are completely de-adjusted, so I'm going to put the rotor opening right over here on the back side of the vehicle so I can adjust the parking brake shoes. One other thing I want to do is take an old axle nut and put it on one of the lug studs with a lug nut on. That's going to hold the rotor flat up against the hub so it doesn't fall off. If it falls off, yes, you can push it on, but not only is it a hassle, also it can actually indicate the wrong adjustment of the parking brake shoes because it'll be at an angle. Take any sort of spacer that you have. I'm using an old axle nut and a lug nut. I'm going to make sure this is seated, and I'm just going to tighten it up by hand. That's all you need so it can sit flat. Now let's take a screwdriver and spread the shoes apart until they start touching. Then I'll back them off a little bit until we have the right adjustment. What you're looking for with parking brake shoes is to almost not even hear them touch. You want to hear them maybe touch the rotor once in a while as you rotate, but that's it. Otherwise, they're too far adjusted. These are not drum brakes. I know for drum brakes you need a little bit of drag, but on parking brake shoes you do not. Otherwise they will overheat as you drive and it will wear them down, and it's actually going to cause these to potentially lock up the wheel. Oh, that's snugged up, which means, yep, we locked it up. So now the shoes are completely seated up against the rotor, so I'm going to back it off. Just a couple clicks, that's all it takes. And I'm going to listen for it. Okay, so it's hard to tell because the other side is audible as well, but I'm pretty sure this is actually perfectly adjusted right here. So what I will do now is go inside the vehicle, apply the parking brake. That's going to center the shoes up nicely in here. We'll test it again and then either adjust further or remove some adjustment to get it just right. I applied the parking brake and removed it. So I hear it at times, but a little bit too much for my liking. So I'm just going to bring it back a couple clicks. That's it. Okay, I like that a lot better. I'm going to test it again, but that is adjusted. All right. One very important step is to put in the plug right here so that water and debris don't get in. Press it on. Okay, a couple pieces of information here. We have to clean up this pin at the bottom, which is attached to the bracket. Speaking of the bracket, these are the two bolts, 14mm headed bolts, that hold this on to the knuckle. I don't find a purpose in removing these other than to clean and inspect things, but as long as this is mounted correctly, there's no reason to remove this. If you were removing this, it would most likely only be for replacement purposes. The torque for these is going to be 48 foot-pounds, so just torque them accordingly when you put it back. And this pin right here has to be cleaned, which is the only thing that is to be touched on this bracket when preparing for new brakes. Let's remove this boot so we can clean underneath it. Inspect the boot. If it's in poor condition, as in torn or swollen, replace it, but mine looks pretty good. Now when it comes to the pin, you can remove it with a 10mm Allen, but there's once again no reason to remove this. It's just right here, so let's clean it. There is surprisingly a limited amount of corrosion considered how stuck the caliper was on here, but I will do my best to clean it with a wire wheel or wire brush and then re-lubricate it so we can install the caliper. You want to make sure you get right in this groove here. That's where the boot seals up. Rinse it with brake parts cleaner. I'm going to lubricate the area that the boot seals up on with some silicone paste, which is rated for brakes, and that means it withstands high temperatures. Then I'm going to put a little bit of silicone paste along the entire pin, but not a lot, and I'll show you why. And after that, I'm going to put the boot back over it, and this is why, because if you put too much, the boot will just wipe it off. so just a thin layer. Press the boot up and over that lip, which is crucial for it to seal up. All right, perfect. And now if you wanted to, you could take some extra brake grease or silicone paste and stick it inside of that boot. Just do the best you can. There we go. So that now, as you slide the caliper over, it's going to have a little reserve in there to keep it lubricated over time. Let's clean the caliper side of that pin. So I'm going to fill this hole, well, almost fill it with brake parts cleaner. I'm just going to give it a quick rinse first. Then I will use a bore brush and clean out the area. Rinse it out. I want to make sure that lip on the outside is clean too. And I'm going to make sure that it is lightly lubricated with some silicone paste so it can slide on easily. And of course, right up here where the boot seals up. Now take your caliper, slide it over that pin, and press it on all the way. What you're looking for is that boot to be seated completely. Press it and use a little screwdriver to pry it away to release any excess air that might be built up in there as you press it on. And that is properly installed. Lubricate the top slider pin boot where this goes through, and this is the one that we unthreaded earlier. Bring your caliper up into position and get the pin through and thread it on. Make sure this slides properly, which it does. Tighten this up. Snug it, and torque this to 18 foot-pounds. That's it. Now when it comes to the caliper, which is where the pads ride, typically I like to avoid putting silicone or brake grease on here because this will collect a lot of junk. However, because I had to clean it, there is now somewhat exposed fresh metal here, and there's already rust buildup. So I'm going to very carefully apply a very thin layer of silicone paste that is, of course, like I said, rated for brakes, and that is going to prevent rust from continuing to build up on this area where the pads ride. Similarly, I'm going to apply some inside of these holes where the pins will ride, and that is mostly so that they don't get stuck. I'm not so concerned about the gunk buildup here. I just don't want them to rust in the future. Slide the brake pads in. The inner pad is going to have a wear indicator that goes on the bottom, and then the outer pad does not have any wear indicator. Now slide your pins through. I clean these up just a little bit so I can get rid of the rust buildup. This way they slide in easier. When you slide this lower one through, you want to make sure the spring that goes down here is in its position, ready to get the pin slid through it. And then we'll just hook this onto the pad. And then the pins will have a couple little holes, and that's where this clip goes in, which is kind of like a cotter pin for the pins and prevents these from sliding out. And this little hook needs to go right in the hole of that pad. When I removed it, I used needle nose pliers, so that's what I'm going to use to put it back in. And that is installed. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, torque them to 76 foot-pounds. "76 foot-pounds in a cross pattern, here we go. Double check them. job is done, take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.